view on education.
I think you did. One last question. The gentleman with the cap.
And I'm very happy to see you, my home girl. I forgot to say that.
Hello, yeah, I support your determination for self-determination, but I just want to remind you of something. You know, the ANC had a rule which they weren't going to break. It was in the Freedom Charter of 1956, which says that the resources of South Africa would be used for the people of South Africa. And, you know, and they were determined, the Freedom Charter, not to break this. But in 2002, I saw an interview with Nelson Mandela conducted by John Pilger. And his answer was, why have you broken that charter? And his reference was the fact that the precious resources of South Africa still remained in the hands of the very few white elite post-apartheid. To the extent that here in this country, Mrs. Thatcher's son moved to South Africa. Lady Diana Spencer's brother moved to South Africa because the tax rates were so favourable if you had wealth. At a time when the people in Soweto were still living in steel huts without running water, as you quite rightly said. And when John Pilger asked him why he said this, his answer was really interesting. Nelson said, but I haven't cheated on that charter. You can now buy shares in these companies. Well, clearly, the people in Soweto can't buy shares. That massacre you mentioned in 2011, what you didn't say was that one of the shareholders was Cyril Ramaphosa. He used to be on the TV in this country every day, leading the ANC. Now he's one of the very wealthy guys who's getting Anglo shares, profits, he's rich. When he was asked, you shot people who were unarmed, he had nothing to say. I just want to say to you, and I'm going to wrap this up quickly, my fear is that you're not addressing the issue. The issue is the reason we love Nelson Mandela is because he made a deal with the white elites, the power structures, the De Beers, the Oppenheimers, to remain in power, and he wouldn't touch their wealth, he wouldn't share their wealth, and that's why we in England love him, because the press tells us to. He betrayed the people of South Africa. And I'm frightened that unless you actually address the fact that the laws of South Africa doesn't make the corporations share the wealth as the Freedom Charter of 56 demands, my fear is nothing will change.
I think you captured it very well. There is no any better explanation than the explanation you have given. The deviation from the Freedom Charter was the beginning of selling out the revolution. But why did Nelson Mandela sell out the Freedom Charter? When Nelson Mandela returned from prison, he got separated with Winnie Mandela and went to stay in a house of the rich white men. He was looked after by the Oppenheimers. Nelson Mandela used to attend the club meetings of those white men who owned the South African economy at the time. He stayed in their complex. He stayed with them. He stayed in one of their houses. They had access to him 24 hours. And they told him that what he represents will not be achieved. And then that's when he turned against himself. Because the Nelson we are celebrating now is not the Nelson we celebrated before prison and during prison. It's a staged, managed Nelson Mandela who compromised the fundamental principles of the revolution, which are well captured in the Freedom Charter. The EFF subscribed to the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter has got a detailed explanation of how everything else is going to be achieved. The Freedom Charter is the Bible of the South African Revolution. Any deviation from that is a sellout position. So, unlike Nelson Mandela, we're doing what Nelson Mandela didn't do. We are happy he ushered in. We normally don't use those phrases like Mandela sold out and we are being too harsh, man. He was too old, he was tired. So he had to give in on some of the things. So he left it to us. We have to take it up where Madiba left it. And that's why Madiba said the struggle is not over. Madiba knew that there is an element of economic freedom that must be ushered in to complete the revolution. Madiba knew that political freedom is incomplete without economic freedom. So I wouldn't sit here and say Nelson sold out. I will say Nelson took us to a particular extent and then left it there for us to take it over. And we are here now. We don't say to Oppenheimer, this will happen, this will not happen. No. We come to Oxford University and Oxford Union and tell you what we tell Africans and what we tell everybody everywhere. The message is the same. We want the total implementation of the Freedom Charter. Those kids who demand free education, they are demanding the implementation of the Freedom Charter. Those who say, let's share in the wealth of the country, they are demanding the implementation of the Freedom Charter. I said to you, when I started, we are just continuing with the legacy of great African leaders who came before us. We're not going to compromise like Madiba did. We had, perhaps, it was necessary to have a cooling off period. We cooled off for far too long, 21 years. Now is the time to stand up and continue with the road towards economic freedom. It is possible. It is going to happen. The most reactionary institutions in South Africa, like universities, are beginning to listen. Because those are the most arrogant institutions. They will tell you we're independent, we don't listen to those things. Academically doesn't make sense. And then they shut down everyone. They're being made to listen. Government in South Africa is listening. We marched to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. We marched to the Reserve Bank in South Africa. We marched to the Chamber of Mines. I sit with you today. All of them are sending responses to our memorandum. All of them are beginning to say, we agree, we need to talk. But in the past 21 years, those were the most arrogant institutions. You can march to them, you can write to them, they will never say anything. 3 times now, the CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange has been calling me, asking for a meeting. All 400 companies registered with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange have received the memorandum of the EFF and are beginning to call individually to come and explain how they've structured their companies, how people are going to benefit. One of the things we demanded